Welcome to the Men of Iron podcast, changing a culture one man at a time. At Men of Iron, we equip men and grow godly leaders through creating and sustaining one-to-one and micro-group mentorships. Go to menofiron.org for more info. Thanks for listening.
In places is a Celtic term, Celtic Christians, ancient Christians that were pushed to the edge of the North Sea and in England and Ireland and out of persecution in some of the darkest times in world history. Yet they survived, and then not only survived, they thrived. And one way they did that was by going small, creating bands, and they basically, they weren't like monks we think today, they were warriors.
Welcome to the Men of Iron podcast. It's Steve and Garrett live from Manheim, PA. G, what's up, man?
Oh, man, it's 70 degrees and sunny outside, land of milk and honey.
I know, we literally just talked about how nice it would be to do this podcast on the rooftop patio, but...
I know. It's a little bit too humid, though.
A little too humid. You might be sweating a little bit.
I'm so greasy,
See those sweat stains in the armpits?
Yeah, that's a given. That's a given.
Episode 39 is brought to you by Utility Keystone Trailer Sales, offering a wide range of solutions for all your hauling needs. Go to utilitykeystone.com for more info. We are so excited to have our special guest here, Tim Bohlke. Tim is the founder of Harbor Minstries, a journey that encourages, challenges, and inspires leaders to live with rhythm, leave a legacy, and finish well. Tim has experienced the challenging and sometimes rough seas of leadership in his roles as an executive leader, pastor, teacher, coach, and counselor. He is passionate about being a husband and dad and has been married to Marcia for more than 30 years. They have 3 grown children and live in Lincoln, Nebraska. Tim, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here with you guys.
What's going on?
Yeah, not much. I'm kind of in the middle of a crazy week, so.
He's got the tour bus sitting out front, man.
I know, it's crazy.
It's like we got a rock and roll star here.
Yeah, just living the dream.
It's really impressive when you pull up and then you get out and you're like, okay.
Who's this guy?
Yeah.
Well, Tim, we just love to just let the listeners and viewers just hear more about who Tim Bohlke is.
Yep. Yeah, I grew up in central Nebraska, actually on a farm out there, and went to college and got a degree in teaching, coaching, and did that for a little while. Realized real quick that classroom was going to be a little too confining for me, and so got into the organization called Youth for Christ, Campus Life, and led that chapter. Became a real large chapter in the Midwest, and did that for a long period of time, and went back and got a counseling degree in the midst of that, and just to kind of keep stretching myself a little bit. And after that, went on staff of a large church and was on the senior leadership there and did that for a few years. And in the midst of that, launched this dream of Harbor Ministry, a organization that could come alongside leaders and, as you said in some of your introduction, help strategic people live with rhythm, leave a legacy in their families, and stay the course and finish well.
It's awesome. We're excited to have you. He's on his how many cities and towns is it? The Thin Places tour.
Yeah, this week we're going to 7 cities in 7 days. Yeah, I am with a couple guys that have done this musically. I've never done it, so they're real excited. I'm excited when I get there, but the sleeping on a bus, man, that's a new thing for me. So
Not a fan of
it's
that.
good.
Well,
it's pretty exciting.
Well, we're lucky to have Tim and the Thin Places tour in town today. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But Tim, are you ready for take 5?
Let's do it.
We got his take 5 blacked out over there.
Yeah, this is mysterious. I like it.
Well, we got your books here on the table. What's the hardest part about writing a book?
I think it's finding for me, the creativity comes in surges, and so you have to commit a lot of time to it, but you're not always feeling productive in that time, So I think it's really carving out the necessary time, getting in the right venues, and to kind of stretch your creativity and shut things down. So committing the time to it was the challenge, but I loved it, and it happened really fast once I started writing. Yeah.
Awesome. Take 5, question number 2. Where is your favorite place in the world to get away?
Favorite place in the world is easy. Crested Butte, Colorado. Been there many years. Went biking there with my friends and for years in college and never gave it up. So still going. It's refuge.
Love it.
Yep.
All right. Question number 3. What is one of your favorite childhood moments?
Ooh, that's a challenge in take 5 there.
This is a challenging one because I've heard some of your stories with your dad, and there's a lot.
Yeah, there is a lot there. I mean, wow. I think off the right, it would be fishing, and kind of the fishing experiences that I had, not only with my dad, but friends. That was the big go-to thing. And on farming, it was always busy, always working. Seemed like a lot, but when the rains would come, you'd always get away. So it was this natural kind of, wow, this is awesome, kind of escape in the mix of the pace of life. Yep.
Love it. All right, question number 4 for take 5. What's the best part about living in Lincoln, Nebraska?
Well, that's also easy. You got to have the Cornhuskers, man. Nebraska football, right? I know I'm in Big Ten country here too, but no. Yeah, I love the Huskers. Grew up watching them.
Awesome.
You guys had a rough year this year.
We had a rough year, so we're not real tough, but we got the right coach in place. So,
there you go.
Yeah, we're pretty excited.
Awesome. All right, well, final question here. What album or song have you had on repeat lately?
That would be Joshua Tree recently.
Okay.
Yeah, Joshua by you too.
Nice.
Okay.
That'd have been the most listened to over the last month.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's all we got for take 5, man. Nice little icebreaker for Tim. What do you think?
He was pretty consistent there. I thought, looking at these questions, knowing Tim the way I do, I would have said that he was. That's how I would have answered for him.
Knew he was going to nail it.
I was interested to hear his last one because you are a big music fan.
I'm a huge music fan and love Tom Petty, but I was thinking what was the most recent thing I listened to.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Actually, on the Thin Place tour, we were in Chicago. We got in earlier than we thought on Sunday, so I had the guy drop us off downtown. I tried to get into the Rolling Stones, but couldn't make it.
Couldn't make it.
That's showing my age there, but boy, the place was rocking from the outside. It was pretty sweet.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's cool. Awesome. Well, we'd love to start kind of with Harbor Ministries and just tell the listeners, what is Harbor Ministries all about and kind of what led you to start Harbor?
Yeah. I mean, it came at its core. I was leading, as I said, a large organization and a lot of staff. We had 45 people on salaried staff at the time, and just a really great run, great best of times in a lot of ways. But in the midst of the leadership journey of that, I began to see a lot of my peers around the country that were struggling, either getting tired, burning out, quitting, or moral failures, and that kind of thing, that just out of what seemed weariness and not always a good explanation for why, but started seeing that developing a burden for that. And so in the midst of leading, kind of what I found out soon was I was going to need a little bit of refuge and a little harbor time myself before I ever started an organization like that, because I hit a wall in my 40s of just the pace and tiredness and everything that was going on, a lot of dynamics to that. But as I did that, and coming out of that harder time, I really developed this passion, burden, that it was time to do something different. There were a lot of good organizations out there and a lot of leadership development, a lot of conferences, but that I didn't want to do a one-shot conference. I knew we wanted to do something different that really came alongside people over a longer period of time. My wiring's relational, and I want to get right in the middle of it with people, so I know I wanted to go small, and we were crazy enough to believe we could start something and even change the world 20 strategic leaders at a time, and if you get the right guys in the room, that can happen. And so that was our belief, hope, and desire going forward when we started it. And these years later, I believe that more than ever that's actually happening. So
it's interesting, Tim, to kind of think through my journey through this Harbor and Rhythm in 20, and I know one of the things I told Steve is like, hey, we don't want to get into too many of the details about this journey because, and I'm going to plan on sharing this tonight a little bit, but I remember I was introduced to Harbor from a board member, somebody that helps you still out to this day, Dave Zillig, and this was back in 2015, and Dave came to me and was like, hey, you remind me a lot of myself at your age, and I think you'd really benefit from this Harbor thing. I kind of see the pace you're running at, and I see what you're doing. And he's like, I just think you ought to apply for Rhythm in 20. And I was like, all right. So I went to the website, watched the video, didn't know what it was, but knew I wanted to be part of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of a lot of guys that come through it. And I remember calling Dave and saying, well, okay, like I'll apply because I trust you, but what am I getting myself into?
Yep.
And he's like, I can't tell you. And I'm like, well, what do you mean you can't tell me? And he's like, well, I can't tell you. It's part of Harbor, part of Rhythm and Rogue is this mystery element. And so I don't know. Can you speak into that at all, Tim? Because I didn't know. I got on a plane to go to Estes Park, Colorado in year one.
Yep.
And didn't know who I was going to see, who I was going to be interacting with. I knew I was going to show up with 19 other guys, and I didn't really know any of them. But, can you talk about the mystery element?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there is a real intentional mystery to it. We don't define things out, don't kind of create lists and agenda or content, for people that are used to seeing that and used to seeing the step-by-step process, what you're doing. I just believe we have a God that is mysterious, that invites us into the unknown without guarantees of outcome. We see that throughout Scripture. And I think, especially in American culture, we box God in. We've kind of created what we think this experience, this spiritual journey, and what Christianity is about. And certainly there's some great elements of that, but we've put him in a box, and I mean, he's wild, man. I mean, you can see that throughout the Bible. He comes sometimes out of nowhere, surprises us with moments, with invitations, with challenges. And I think the other thing is that I had a value on was I believe God loves risk takers, and he's invited men and women throughout history to take a step into the unknown. And so we thought, if we want to get the right people who will benefit most from this, that they got to be willing to take a risk, take a little bit of step of faith for people they don't know, and get around and step into an experience where there's not true definition, but I think they'll know. As Garrett just said, when he watched the video, he had a little bit of a stir, had a recommendation from somebody, and there was something about it that got you there. And I think coming in with that mindset, that's pretty cool, because then you can see where God really starts to get at work with these guys. Yeah, and
I don't remember what year it was, if it was year one, or I remember even Crested Butte. I remember thinking the third year, I'm like, man, oh man, I'm heading out there. It's a challenge to get to Crested Butte, Colorado.
Yeah,
it is a challenge.
Yeah, that in itself.
And I remember you being like, man, you guys risked it. You risked this opportunity to, continue in your jobs, continue what God's calling you to do, but you've taken the risk to be here. And so it's hard, it's challenging. I think that's part of the Harbor experience. Is it takes a little bit of willingness to kind of get outside the norm and get outside your comfort zone a little bit, which I really appreciated about it.
Yep, that's the hope and challenge all along. So
it's good.
Yeah,
it's awesome. Well, I think that kind of leads us in, Tim, to the next piece of that. You talked about this wild, mysterious God that we serve, that we read about throughout Scripture, and you just released this book, Thin Places. Yep. And so tell us a little bit about your heart behind the book, Thin Places, maybe to kind of talk about the concepts of boredom, fatigue, disappointment, kind of what led you to write this book and what it's about.
Yeah, it's a really personal work. I mean, and it started really just with me. I'm a journaler, and I like to write. That's how I process. And as I get into kind of extended times of solitude, I do a lot of writing. But as I did, and over the last couple of years, I began to process what I was writing. Felt like there was more that was going on there, that I needed to kind of bring this into a more a tool for people, and it just created great substance. And the idea of thin places is a Celtic term. Celtic Christians, ancient Christians that were pushed to the edge of the North Sea and in England and Ireland, and out of persecution in some of the darkest times in world history. Yet they survived, and they not only survived, they thrived. And one way they did that was by going small, creating bands, and they basically, they weren't like monks we think today. They were warriors. Yeah. I mean, they fought, and they protected their beliefs, and they protected this practice of seeking God, and it was really because of some of them that Scripture was preserved. So it kind of came out of an inspiring reading of these ancient Christians and what they were about, but they had a term for encountering God called thin places. A lot of people have written about that, talk about that concept, but the idea is moments when heaven and earth collide. And just for a moment, we get a glimpse of how this life was intended to be, and get a glimpse into who God is. And I think we've all had that when we started exploring that concept. We've all had those moments, whether it's a moment kind of our salvation journey started, or sometimes it's real simple times of a sunset, sometimes more profound. and dramatic where it just kind of stops you and say God's kind of breaking through and giving us a window into the beauty of what he's created, or a window into the character who he is. And so I started tracking my journal entries and seeing these moments through Harbor Ministry journey, my personal journey, our family. They come sometimes in the hardest of times. A lot of times they do, and sometimes in the best, but started to capture those moments, and I just wanted to start to create something that I hope would inspire readers to be more open to those thin place moments when they come.
Can you talk about, or in the book you mention about, boredom, fatigue, and disappointment as that, perfect storm in a lot of leaders' lives?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that perfect storm in your own journey as a leader and as a man, and why is burnout so common among ministry leaders, do you think?
Yeah, for sure. For me, it came in kind of the segment of early 40s. As I mentioned, we were building a large organization, and people were sending others to us to kind of see what we were doing, how we were doing it. And we were reaching several thousand kids and families a week, and it was a really exciting time. But in the midst of that journey of leading, growing, some cracks in the armor, so to speak, were happening for me. And I reference it now as a perfect storm, and I can identify it now as I think back what it was. It was stuff others weren't seeing, but disappointment and fatigue and boredom were the words, as you said, Garrett, that came to mind. And fatigue, just off the context of leading an organization, we were raising actually millions of dollars at the time, for different things, and it was tiring. I mean, you just kind of had to go up next day and do it again, and just around that model of a lot of people depending on you that got tired, disappointed. And I think, honestly, I didn't name it, but I lost both my parents when I was in my 20s. My dad was a big impact person in my life, and I never really dealt with that. Just kind of pushed on. Once that was done, once that loss occurred, and went in and threw myself into work and ministry, and certainly grieved it, but never really dealt with some of the core stuff around that loss and what that created. And so it was that. I mean, I thought by the time I was 40, I was going to be a basketball coach at Duke. It didn't turn out, right? I did think I was going to be coaching basketball somewhere. That was kind of what my dream was. It didn't happen. And so there was disappointments that kind of settled in. Then boredom, I've done this thing for 20 years. I could do a lot of the work with my eyes closed. And I don't say that overconfidently. Just, you get into a habit. You do something fairly well. You learn how to do it. And sometimes you settle in and coast. Those things settled in and create problems, I think, when men and women. But when those three things collide and they don't get dealt with, that's when disaster happens, and it was real close for me.
Wow.
So making decisions would have compromised family and other aspects of what I was doing. But also, when those things do get checked, I think God's used tired, disappointed, bored men to create unbelievable things. Mm-hmm. And really, this Harbor journey was created out of that moment of, I got to do something different. I got to do something different in my own life. I got to invite others into something different. We got to figure this out. So.
You mentioned in the book Thin Places, like not being able to identify those warning signs.
Yeah.
That perfect storm is coming and you almost didn't even see it. What advice would you give to men who are kind of headed down that same path, but maybe don't see the warning signs either?
Yeah, I think one thing would be just not to isolate. And even though I was in a large staff, hundreds of volunteers, a lot of people around, I was isolated because I didn't have a lot of peers, that were leading like I was, I guess, in that context. And so who did you go talk to? And then leading that organization, I had a young family at the time and a wife who didn't necessarily want to hear that I was struggling or doubting, not saying that negatively toward her, but, that's a hard time for young families too. And they don't want to know their husbands, hey, I'm kind of in trouble here. So you don't talk to your donors. You're trying to raise money. You don't want to tell them you're having doubts or struggles, your board or your staff. So who do you go to? So I would say loneliness is something that takes people out, and you can be lonely in a crowd for sure. And so I think loneliness in the life of a leader is a significant thing. And then I think if you start losing the balance, and I know this is stuff you guys are passionate about, but if you start losing, the balance of physical, exercise and attending to the things that keep us healthy, and stop playing, stop seeking God, in the quiet. I was taking people to places where I wasn't going myself anymore, and in terms of my spiritual journey. And so I needed to kind of circle back. And so one other indicator for me was I stopped playing. Some of the stuff I was most passionate about, I was working more, and stopped filling my own tank, doing some of the things that give me energy. Yeah.
Why, we want to, a lot of our listeners we get women as well, but a lot of our listeners are obviously men due to the Men of Iron podcast. But why do you think, Tim, through this experience of Harbor, through your experience in leadership, you're still on staff with the church, but talk a little bit about why you feel church and religion maybe feel so boring and lifeless to a lot of men?
Yeah. Well, I think one, I agree. I think it does. Yeah. And so I've heard somebody talk a few years ago that in the context of the church in general, I'm saying today that women are tired, men are bored. I mean, women are serving, and all kinds of things they're plugging into, and they're getting tired. Men are bored stuff. And that's what I've seen. I don't think we're getting called out to a mission that's greater than ourselves. I mean, church in general, and again, I'm speaking in generalities here. I'm on staff of a large church, but I have stopped giving challenges, stopped inviting us to take risks. I mean, if it comes down to kind of sitting in the pew for an hour, engaging here or there, doing some other things, but hey, we're getting in our lives of work, we're getting challenged and called out and pushed, and we push ourselves, and church isn't doing that. But yet the mission's so much greater. So I think we've lost that challenge to men, and it's become in my mind, a very passive man that's a part of church. It's partly just wanting to get through it.
Well, that kind of leads us into that next question here, because we said, you refer to God and the Holy Spirit as a wild goose, and in your book, Thin Places, and this was a name that was used by Celtic Christians. Wild, mysterious, unpredictable. Why do we too often try to tame God and put him in a box? I mean, what?
Yeah, well, I think it's safe. It's like it makes it safer for us in our experience, and so it's two-edged sword, right? I mean, we're talking about men that are bored, but we've become generally passive too, and so why not keep it safe, and keep the definition and who God is right there. I think it's an author I'm blanking on that refers to the American church today as clipped the wings of the wild goose. I mean, we've made him in our minds tame, and he's not tame. He is going to invite us into dangerous things, I think.
Well, before we get into the Thin Places tour, because that's happening here tonight, actually at the location of our office here, but Tim, I think back to my experience through Rhythm in 20, and I just want to wrap this journey up about 2 years ago. And from year 1 to year 3, and I don't want to give it away because I want it to be like this mystery component, but there's a spiritual discipline that you guys push really hard.
Yeah.
And from my experience was leaving year 1, it was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this in the midst of my chaotic life? But I remember leaving Estes Park, and I remember you said, like, you're going to have to fight for this. You looked at everybody in that room that day. You said, you're going to have to fight for it. Your schedules, your families, your jobs, life is going to try to get in the way of this, and you're going to have to fight for it. And I committed. I remember thinking, like, I'm going to write this down. I'm going to commit to this thing. And that's changed my life. It really has. It's probably still the reason I'm here, leading at Men of Iron. I believe it's even when I'm taking those days where I'm practicing this discipline, it's when I do experience those thin place moments where God shows up, where heaven and earth meet just for that moment, and you might get, maybe it's clarity on something, it might be a little bit of extra strength that you need in that moment, but it happens every single time. And I remember it's like any discipline, right? Like, we've got to be able to build it. You've got to be able to kind of go out and think, I've never done this in my life. I'm not going to be perfect at this the first time I do it. And it's a practice. It takes practice.
Yep.
And I don't know if you want to speak into that at all. I don't want to ruin it for anybody that might be on, but
no, for sure. I mean, they can read the book, though. See a lot about it anyway. So no, I think there is a in my mind a very clearly ignored spiritual discipline and that's one of solitude and quiet. We talk about, scripture and prayer and a lot of the dynamics that are critical, important, and part of the Christian experience, Christian life. But this is one thing I never heard about ever. And in my journey through the church and from other Christians and being mentors, stuff like that, I never heard it. And so I just think it's nothing new. It's an ancient practice, and we see it starting with Jesus and coming on through the ages, through all the generations since. That difference makers are ones that quiet down, figure out how to shut off the noise in their lives, unplug, and listen. I mean, that my belief, thought is that God is speaking to us through the events of our lives and the circumstances and the day-to-day and in the moments. But if we're not attending to that, if we're not getting ourselves in a position to actually listen, why is it surprising that we don't hear? Yeah. So that's something we really dial into and ask people to commit to that practice during the 1 or 2 year journey there with us. So.
Yeah, and it really has. I wanted to share this with our listeners because this has had such an impact on me. It's now a requirement for our staff. They have to do a full day, a month. And the other thing it's impacted is all of our mentors and proteges. It's now a spiritual discipline that we're pushing on mentors and proteges alike. And I can tell you, we talk about getting into the Word, we talk about prayer, and when we mention solitude, man, we get pushback.
Yeah.
We get pushback, but we also, the guys that do it, love it. You know. So Tim, just know, man, that your work, what God's called you to do with Harbor, is not just impacting Harbor, but it's impacting Men of Iron as well.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Just really excited about that. So tell us, just briefly, about the Thin Places tour. What's going on? What are you guys doing here?
Yeah, so our hope is, we just finished the 20th group of either Rhythm and 20 or Rogue. Rhythm and 20s, the 3-year journey for millennials, and Rogue for guys in their upper 30s and up, 2-year journey. And we finished our 20th group and just started 21 and 22, so we're in kind of this new phase of organization. And one of the passions of mine is to circle back, invest back into people that have been through this, that have finished a journey. We've had guys come from 40 different states into these events, and a couple of countries too, and a lot of them are out there and needing reminders. I think one of the important things is to remember how God showed up in the midst of those journeys. Remember to not forget the discipline of solitude, those kind of things. So we want to kind of take the experience of Rhythm and 20 and Rogue on the road for a couple purposes. One, to gather those that have been through it, to get with you guys here that have been through it, but equally important, we want this to be a window, an opportunity to invite new people in, to get exposed to what we're doing, and invite families and wives too, to be able to see, wives I should say, and to be able to see what we're about, what we're doing, and get a little glimpse. The Thin Place Tour is what we hope will be an inspiring night that will encourage people to keep pursuing God, to keep chasing those thin place moments, to have the eyes and ears and heart that's open to experience and see God when He does show up.
Awesome. Well, tell the listeners and viewers, how can guys be part of Rhythm and 20 and Rogue?
So there's a couple things here. It is selective. People do have to give application. One of the commitments of this was we wanted to go small and have explosive growth of impact, just like you're talking about here, Garrett, through Men of Iron, those dynamics. That's fuel for me. And but I think you do that with just 20 guys at a time. That's been our commitment. So to have any group, and then we're talking 20 guys across the country in each group. So, but welcome the applications, and just knowing that, and you can go to rhythmin20.com. That's all spelled out. And if you're in the mid-20s to upper 30s, go to that site, fill out an application, and then roguejourney.org for upper 30s and up, and that gives you a lot of information. Still a lot of mystery at those websites, but there's a video there you ought to watch, and if you feel a stir, I tell people, and watching that video, you'll know.
Yep.
And get that application in, and we have, all the groups are full for 2019, honestly, but we'll have 3 new groups, likely 4 in 2020, so this is a good time to get in on the front end of several new groups that are coming.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll make sure all these links are up there, and harborministries.com as well. We'll get you there.
Okay. Yes, it will.
Awesome. Well, Tim, thank you so much for joining us today. It's going to be a fun night tonight.
I can't wait, man. I can't wait. I love what these guys do, and it's hard as an organization to really. It takes work. I do believe that we need to collaborate, and it's hard sometimes to find organizations that I say this very vulnerably, that you trust and that you're completely on board with. And I've said it from day one, man. Like I'm all in on Harbor, and I love what they're doing and how they're doing it. And there's been a couple of guys that I've recommended, and if you're a leader and you're leading at a high capacity, and you feel like you're tired, like you're worn out, and like you're just not quite sure you've got enough in the tank to keep going, I highly recommend you apply, because that's where I was at in 2015, and it just did something. God did something big through my experience in there, so I just highly recommend it. Believe in Tim, believe in his team, and love what they're doing.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Tim, for joining us. You can go to harborministries.com to find out more info on Rhythm and 20 and Rogue. Thank you to our sponsor, Utility Keystone. For more info on the Men of Iron podcast, go to menofiron.org/podcast. You can find us all over the place, man.
Yeah.
Apple
we need
Podcasts.
some podcast sponsors.
We do. So if you're interested in getting your business or brand out there on the podcast, let me know.
Yeah.
All right, episode 39, we're out. Thanks, guys.